Hello, Middlebury, and welcome to our last installment in the MIDDVantage series, Careers on Capitol Hill. My name is Fariha Haque, and I'm the director of Middlebury in DC. It is my honor to introduce you to Congressman Sean Casten, who graduated from Middlebury College in 1993. Congressman Casten represents Illinois' 6th Congressional District, located in Chicago's western suburbs. He is the first Democrat to represent this district in nearly 50 years. Since taking office, Congressman Casten has introduced and co-sponsored legislation in support of clean energy, women's rights, protections for seniors, and universal health care. He currently serves on the House Financial Services Committee, the Space, Science, and Technology Committee, the Select Climate Crisis Committee, and is co-chair of the New Dems Climate Change Task Force. Thank you so much for joining us today, Congressman Casten.
Nice to see you, Fariha.
You have had an interesting career as a scientist, business executive, and a member of Congress. Could you walk us through how you got here today?
You know, I think I'm just the typical liberal arts grad, right? You know, you get exposed to a lot of stuff at Middlebury and you take it from there. I didn't, when I got out of Middlebury, I had this vague, I knew that I wanted to do something that related to climate change. And I had this vague sense that it was going to probably involve something in the business realm. But I knew that I was good at science. I was a molecular biology undergrad, and I figured, all right, we'll sort of see where this goes. And at the time, biotech was kind of taken off as a field in the pharmaceutical side, and I thought, well, maybe it was going to be something in the industrial side. So worked in a lab for a couple of years, went back to grad school to learn about industrial biotech, went to Dartmouth, got a master's in biochemical engineering, trying to figure out how to make cellulosic biofuels that would lower CO2 emissions, develop a new technology, and play on all those strengths. From there, went to consulting, because that's what liberal arts graduates from New England colleges like to do, but technology consulting in Cambridge at Arthur D. Little. And gradually came to the realization that there were way too many totally proven technologies that were underdeployed for this to really be a science problem. And it just sort of felt like my early intuition that this was probably a business issue was starting to feel right. And got the entrepreneurial bug, started up, ran a couple companies to sort of fulfill that space, and would have still been doing that, but we sold our company in September 16. Was trying to figure out what to do next. And after the election of Trump, I sort of felt like things I really care about, science, treating people with decency, using sort of competitive markets as ways to solve societal problems. All that was in jeopardy. And it sort of felt like, okay, I can't change the laws of thermodynamics. I can't change the laws of economics, but I don't need to. I just need to change the laws of the United States. And so here I am, in just basically my newest entrepreneurial venture.
What surprised you the most about Capitol Hill?
It's funny, I'm always reluctant. Superlative questions are tricky, but in this particular case, I have a really easy answer. That when we were first sworn in, one of the first things we had to deal with was got whisked into a classified briefing because the Treasury Department was lifting sanctions against Rusal, this company that's backed by Oleg Deripaska, a really bad dude who was tied in with the election meddling in 2016, close ties with the Kremlin. And so here I am sitting there thinking, apparently I get access to classified information. I have to go in, I have to learn all this stuff and come up to speed. And we had to do all this because under the laws, when the Treasury Department lifts sanctions, Congress has 30 days to respond. Normally that would have gone through the Intel Committee, but because this had been done over Christmas, the committees weren't set up yet. We just had a new election. We didn't know what the membership of this was going to be. So I went through and I was sort of dutifully, furiously taking notes, trying to learn everything I needed to know, becoming totally shocked by what I was hearing. And I looked at my fellow new freshman, Alyssa Slotkin, who's a former career CIA. And I looked at her, shocked by what I was hearing, raised my eyebrows to signal what I was shocked by. She raised her eyebrows back at me, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I'm kind of getting my ropes here. I'm sort of communicating with the CIA analysts. I'm understanding what the problems are. And I walk out and I see Alyssa and I'm feeling all full of myself. And I said, so Alyssa, were you as shocked as I was in there? And she looks at me and says, what the are you doing taking notes in a classified briefing? And it was at that point that I realized, and this is the thing that's most surprising, is that This is the only job, I think, in the world where you get access to our nation's secrets without a background check, without training in how to process that information. And so much of a lot of what we are grappling with right now, we would not have to grapple with if we simply required that every elected official has to get an FBI background check. Now, I don't know what, like, democratically, what would you do with that, right? Would you tell the voters? What if you get somebody elected? I don't think we really contemplate that, but it is shocking to realize how hard we work to protect our secrets from a whole lot of bad people, and how the, democracy, what's the Churchill line, that democracy is a lousy form of government except for all the alternatives. It doesn't guarantee that you elect people who you would trust with classified information, and yet here we are.
What do you enjoy the most about your job?
Without exception, it is Katie McGinty, who's a longtime friend, used to run the Council of Environmental Quality in the Clinton White House and was one of the early people to encourage me to do this. She said that if you know what your North Star is in this life and you are intellectually curious, there's no greater job. And every day of this job, I'm just reminded of that again and again. And her corollary, by the way, was that if you don't know what your North Star is and you're not intellectually curious, there's no worse job. But you have this, if you know where you want to go, you can pull these huge levers. In my last job, I feel pretty proud of the fact that I deployed $200 million of capital, built a lot of clean energy projects, lowered a lot of CO2. That took me 16 years. That's a pretty good bullet point in a resume. I can pass one bill that puts an order of magnitude more money into the clean energy sector and affects the huge number of businesses, not just my own. And so you just have these tremendous levers. And then the intellectual curiosity part, people expect us as members of Congress to be experts on everything. We're not. But the fact that they expect that means that we have access to any expert that we want. And so the great perk of this job is, I have had, these are all true stories. I've had mornings where I got into the office and one of my staffers said, it's not on your schedule, but Bill Gates wants to have lunch with you today. It's not on your schedule, but Al Gore wants to have lunch with you today. You've got a dinner tonight with Susan Rice talking about national security issues. Ben Bernanke is coming in to advise on, how to think about this economic downturn we're going on. And I don't say those names to name drop. I'm saying you have people who are real experts in their field who say, I want to come and give of my expertise to folks who want to listen. And it's just this amazing opportunity to drink from the fire hose and learn about anything you want, really.
In the first episode in this series, Professor Matt Dickinson from the Political Science Department kicked it off, and he highlighted the importance of getting reelected. Could you react to that? Is everything really all about elections?
It is and it isn't. And I think the answer varies very much from member to member. If your highest goal in this life is to win an election, I don't know how you I don't know how you're happy. Like, once you've achieved that goal, what's next on your Maslow's need hierarchy, right? For some of my colleagues, that's certainly their highest ambition. And for them, that's what it is. On the other hand, I think for me, and I don't think I'm unique in this regard, you win the election because that's the tool that allows you to do your job, right? And when I was a CEO running businesses, I didn't love doing annual reviews and timesheets and reviewing our accounting records and preparing board reports. But you do that so that you can do the thing you love, because otherwise you don't have a business that works, right? And I think if, for those who are, it's Katie McGinty's point. If you know what your North Star is, winning an election is a way that you can help achieve that North Star. And you have to think about it and you have to spend time on it. And it's not without its ego stroking satisfactions. And it's not without its own set of skills that you get to learn as well. I mean, learning, in some ways, I think the most interesting part of this job that nobody teaches you is not how do you follow public opinion, but how do you shape public opinion. And the process of winning an election, if you're true to where your values are, that becomes a really critical tool. So it's important, but I think at least for myself and for the members who I really sort of get along with, it's a means to an end, not an end in itself.
Could you explain the legal separation between official and political activity, and how does that affect members of Congress, and why is that important?
It's a great question. It is hugely important and has hugely negative consequences that are hard to talk about. So the basic idea is that in order for us to have a government that has, minimum potential for corruption, you cannot commingle your campaign and official side activities. So, when in my last election, we raised $6 million to go and get on TV, do mailers, what have you. We'll probably do something like that again this cycle. I mean, the numbers are obscene, right? There are a lot of members who don't have to raise anywhere near that much money. There are some members who raise a lot more than that amount of money. If you allowed those resources to trickle on to the official side, you'd have a huge sort of potential for graft and influence, right? And not just financially. If I've got somebody who says on the campaign side, I have huge big data expertise. I want to build an app that will help you do all sorts of, voter tracking and voter registration, and use this to help you get help you get reelected. They can provide that service as some kind of an in-kind contribution and become a part of your team. Well, if that same person then says, I'm going to help you use these tools nationwide to suppress certain votes, right? That would be a problem, right? And so we set up these boundaries that say, the campaign side, you have people who work on that side who cannot cross the line, and you are constrained only by the amount of money that you can raise. On the official side, every office gets the same amount of money, roughly speaking. There's some slight differences for travel, but for the most part, we all get about $1.6 million a year that has to cover our salaries, our staff salaries, travel back and forth, the district offices, your caseworkers that are helping out in the district. And so none of us have any differential advantage to provide those services as a result of our official side funding. Where it creates problems is that it's, in a weird way, it makes incumbents more powerful. Because when I got sworn in, I had built this big communication engine on our official side, because in addition to all the volunteers and the money you raise, you've got a Facebook page, you've got a Twitter page, you've got all your digital team, and we built this megaphone we could use to communicate. You then get in, and on your official side, you can't use that same Facebook page. You can't use the same people. And so all of a sudden, we've got a mailing list with a huge number of people in the district who we got on the campaign side. And not only can we not communicate official side news of what I'm doing as a member with them, but we can't transfer the lists either. They have to voluntarily opt into those lists. And it's reasonable, and there's the reasons why it's there are sensible, but it has the practical effect of forcing you as a freshman member to either try to find ways to communicate on the campaign side, which you're not allowed to do. I can't put a picture of me speaking on the floor, which would be an official activity, to my campaign account, or to just to be forever overshadowed by your members who've been there for a while, have built up their official side operation a little bit more. And it's not intentional. I don't know how you fix it, and it's not the only conflict, but there are tensions that you have to manage.
What has it been like for you coming from the private sector, being the CEO, just kind of being in charge of all the variables as much as you can be, to Congress?
So in some ways, it's actually great training, because the structure of Congress, every office is largely an independent fiefdom. We're responsible for hiring our own people. We can decide, our office may have a different pay scale than the office next door. We may have different titles, different positions, even things like, employment policies. The House provides a a standard set of non-discrimination documents, but those are, we're expected to comply with the minimum, but we can go beyond that. When I was sworn in, the non-discrimination documents that the House Administration Committee had put together from the last administration on a bipartisan basis, because this was the most they could get on a bipartisan basis, did not allow discrimination on the basis of gender, race, religion, or country of origin. And they were explaining this to us, and I said, well, wait a minute, what about sexuality? And they said, well, you can add that if you want, but we, essentially we couldn't get the votes to pass that. And you sit there saying, this is bizarre, right? Because we're all run as independent fiefdoms, the experience of building an organization from scratch, managing it, figuring out how to sort of, communicate with your team, give them incentives and rewards, give people leashes. Leashes, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, right? How much freedom do you give people? How tightly do you manage them? Skills that you develop in an entrepreneurial world. And if you've never done that before, this is a very high stakes, high profile place to have to learn those skills, because it's hard to learn those skills without making some mistakes along the way, but the mistakes are pretty public when you make them here. So that stuff is pretty similar. I think the piece that is dramatically different is that the private sector is first and foremost meritocratic. Not always. It's got certainly problems with it, and there's plenty of times when we fail to be as meritocratic as we should be. But the private sector is animated by being meritocratic. Congress is animated by being driven by seniority, and that can be really, really difficult. Because it doesn't, the people who head committees are not necessarily the people who are the smartest members of Congress on that particular issue. They're the people who have been serving on that committee for the longest period of time. And I don't mean that in any way to disparage my colleagues, but it can be extremely frustrating to come in and say, I've got 20 years of experience in the energy industry, and that doesn't really matter. There's no other industry where, if you were to move to another college, Fariha, I'm guessing people wouldn't say, well, we're going to start you as a junior non-tenured faculty member because, all the time you spend at Middlebury doesn't count in this organization. But that's essentially what the organization I'm in now does. And it's a problem.
And that's a nice segue into, something that you're an expert on that, as you know, Middlebury students are very, very passionate about, are studying climate policy. What do you see coming up the pipeline next year? All eyes are on that right now, and you're the expert.
So, what I hope is that we've done the work this Congress. The Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, which Speaker Pelosi created, appointed 8 of us to serve on. I was one of the 8. And we went through to craft a report that my good friend David Roberts at Vox has described as the most serious and comprehensive climate policy ever crafted by the United States Congress. And it wasn't blowing smoke. And I think a part of why he said that and why I feel that is that we went through and we said, what does the science tell us we have to do? Not what do we think is politically possible? What does the science say we have to do? We then looked at all the bills that have been announced in this Congress, put them all together in a package, calculated what they could do, and then we're honest enough to say, that's not enough. So here's some additional things that we suggest we get done, and that will then get us to what's scientifically necessary. We put that together. It's a 520-page report, and it's a report. And we deserve absolutely no praise for writing a report unless we can get it signed into law. But we now have the roadmap that we didn't have before. And my hope for the next Congress is that we do, the United States passes a major energy bill about every 15 years. We did one in 1978, the next one was 92, the next one was 2005. We're due. And we now have the map to do it. We don't have time to sit around and sit on our thumbs. We also don't have time to do it wrong. And that's a pretty grave responsibility, particularly when there are so many righteous voices calling for urgency. Yes, we have to be urgent, but we also, we can't afford to put this down and then say, well, we'll fix some of the flaws 15 years from now. We just don't have that much time. So, I think we've got the roadmap. My hope is that, my hope is that we'll have a Democratic majorities, but what I really want in the next term is a majority of members who do not think that science is something that is subject to democratic whims or worth being politicized. Because if we have people who are deferential to the science, then we'll get done what has to get done.
And then within your party, there is some difference in thought on how to achieve some of these goals.
Yeah, and that's healthy, right? I mean, if you have a majority that says we understand what the science says is necessary, it's totally healthy to have a debate about what's the best way to get to the goals that we share, right? And I would submit it's also totally healthy for those debates to be pretty passionate. But if we, if we all agree we got to get from A to B, that debate can also be very respectful. The place where the debates get disrespectful, and I would suggest to you constructively disrespectful, is when somebody, starts, making things up and denying that the science is real. I tell people all the time, I had some students who recently said to me, how would you suggest treating people or talking to people who don't believe in climate change? And I said, the same way you should treat people or talk to people who don't believe in gravity, with ridicule and scorn, because they've earned it.
A lot of the Middlebury students watching right now are interested in working on Capitol Hill. What do you look for in staffers when you're hiring them?
You've got to be smart. You've got to be an almost ridiculously hard worker. What's tragic is that because of what we said about, remember I have $1.5 million to cover my annual budget, and we got about 20 staff. You can do the math. This is not a job where you get rich, but you get tremendous exposure. You get tremendous influence. If you also have that North Star, and if you also really like learning things, this is an awesome job. And, staffers are the completely unheralded and unappreciated part of DC, because for most of the legislation you see come out, for most of the letters that you see, the very high profile events, even in some cases, the great testimony that sort of goes viral on Now This or something like that, behind that is usually a lot of work of a lot of staffers that wrote the letter, wrote the legislation, in some cases came up with the idea, found the great little fact to drop. And of course, we as members, get all the glory for that. But the staffers are the ones who really deserve it. And so having the ability to do that work, the desire to really make a difference on the public policy ground, and the humility to sort of be comfortable with the fact that ultimately, unfortunately, but it's the reality, is the members are going to get we're going to be getting a lot of the glory for that. Not that we deserve it, but it's sort of the nature of it's the nature of how the media environment works around here. But somebody who's got those smarts, the ability to work hard, that North Star, and also that quest for knowledge, because the staffers get to participate. All those stories I told you, I was staffed in all those meetings. So, so you get to come here, and all of a sudden you're the one going through, and as you rise up the chain, pretty soon you're the person saying, hey, my boss just told me to set up a call with Bill Gates. Let me chase him down and reach out to him to see if I can set something up. And sometimes that morphs to saying, well, why don't we just run this on a staff level? You don't need to do it. So you really get some really cool access as a staffer too, that requires some discretion. But it can be a pretty fun job, I think.
Do you have any parting advice for Middlebury College students in general?
I guess I would flash back to how we started this conversation. When I was a senior at Middlebury, I told you I wanted to do something in business and science. I didn't know where it was, and I somehow managed to cajole 3 different biotech CEOs into talking to me and networking. And I asked them what they thought I should do if I knew I wanted to do something in the clean tech world, in the scientific realm. The first guy who had a PhD told me that I could never survive in that field if he didn't have a PhD. The second guy who had an MBA told me I could never survive in that field if I didn't have an MBA. And the third guy who had a PhD and an MBA told me that I really should plan on spending the next 8 years in school because unless I got both those, it wasn't going to work. And I tell that story because the conclusion I came to at the time is that there's a lot of paths to a happy, successful life. And happy, successful people tend to tell you that the only path is the one they took. And so I think that, I think the best, the aggregate advice I got from that time that I'd give to Middlebury students or to any students is, if you're really lucky, you know where your North Star is. If you don't know where your North Star is, don't try to fake it. Be open, but try to put yourself in positions where you have as many possible doors that can open as they can, where you're surrounded by intelligent people who can train you. And when you see that door open, have the courage to walk through it.
Thank you so much, Congressman Casten. I really appreciate it. I also wanted to have a special thanks to Erin Ravana, class of 2001, who works on the Hill, Susie Sterner, class of 1990, for their assistance in putting this series together.
Thank you so much, Fariha, and go Panthers.